When Dorothy Gale woke up in the Technicolor dreamscape of Oz, it was a striking transition. The Wizard of Oz dramatically shows the change from black and white to rich, vibrant color. True wizardry. That was in 1939, but more than a decade later, American television viewers were still living in the black and white monochrome of Dorothy's Kansas. Color had not yet come to primetime. Today I'm going to talk about how the United States shifted to color television. But before I dive into this curious tale of broadcasting standards, I want to mention that this video is a part of a series on the histories of color television, done in collaboration with our friends at Asianometry. I will point you to the other videos in just a minute, but until then, let's do a quick recap of the state of affairs in the development of television. In 1926, Scottish inventor John Baird demonstrated the first successful broadcast of television, which was in black and white. But only 2 years later, he demonstrated color TV. Unfortunately, the world wasn't quite ready for it yet. Instead, broadcasters stuck with monochrome for recording, transmitting, and receiving television signals. Even still, television adoption was a slow process. Obviously, the Great Depression didn't help, nor did a world war. By the end of World War II, there were only 3,000 television sets in the entire United States, mostly concentrated in the New York City area. But then a tidal wave.
1945, the war over. After 4 years of unparalleled war effort, denial,
By 1949, U.S. companies were churning out almost 1 million sets a year,
by television, American business has found a most effective...
with people watching programming from coast to coast. The next obvious step was broadcasting in color, and throughout the 1940s, various companies took up the task. Color is more difficult to transmit than black and white and takes up more bandwidth. It's a story rich with big names. RCA and CBS from radio, Paramount and Hollywood teaming up with the famous physicist E.O. Lawrence. But it is also a story steeped in failure. Lots of smart guys spent a lot of money with very little success. I discussed the technical challenges and one of the more interesting unsuccessful attempts experimenting with color TV in my previous video. And my friend John at Asianometry showcases Sony's ultimate success story with the Trinitron in his video. Please go ahead and check them out. But something underlying both stories is the need to develop broadcast standards. Standards might seem boring. Most people don't think about them until they confront an anomaly, such as an incompatible charging cable or electrical sockets in foreign countries. But getting to a standard is often a grueling battle, pitting manufacturers, consumers, and governments against each other, each trying to figure out what is best. And by what is best, we mean what is best for them. And even the word best here can mean different things to different parties. Most elegant or most reliable technology, easiest or cheapest to manufacture, or more energy efficient. Compromises have to be made, and someone always loses out. In 1941, the United States National Television Standards Committee issued its first standard for analog black and white television. It set the number of scan lines, that is, the number of individual horizontal lines on a screen, at 525, and the frame rate at 30 frames or images per second. This helped standardize production transmission and the resolution for television. But it was also a compromise among Hollywood producers, the Radio Corporation of America, Philco, and Dumont, all who were making their mark in television and arguing for different standards for scan lines and frame rates. All of these companies were also working on how to record, transmit, and recombine color television signals. Of course, like most engineering problems, there was not a single correct solution. Each of the major players researching color TV were approaching the problem from a different perspective with a predictable outcome, a total lack of compatibility. A nightmare for both television studios eager to film in color and consumers who, quite reasonably, wanted to be able to watch all available shows on their televisions. In the late 1940s, the frontrunner in color television was Columbia Broadcasting System, or CBS. They had developed a mechanical system based on Scottish inventor John Baird's original idea of a rotating color wheel, divided equally into 3 different colors, red, blue, and green. CBS would film programs using a monochrome camera, shooting through a rotating color wheel so each frame was shot in a single color. This is known as a field sequential color system. The images were then transmitted and received by a television that had a similar rotating color wheel that decoded the red frames to red frames, blue frames to blue frames, and green frames to green frames. On replay, the frames moved fast enough that a person's brain overlaid them and saw a full color image. When it worked, it was brilliant. Unfortunately, it didn't always work. Originally, the frame rate was too slow, resulting in a noticeable and annoying flicker. Also, the color wheels were easily knocked out of sync, which meant ghastly colors. Still, CBS plowed ahead. They partnered with General Electric to build color televisions. The National Museum of Scotland has one in its collection, considered the oldest surviving color TV in the world. But it's unlikely that that set was ever used for anything other than demonstration purposes. On January 30th, 1947, the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, refused to grant CBS a broadcast license for color television, saying that the CBS system was not advanced enough. With no color programming, obviously there was no use for a color television set. At least, not quite yet. Meanwhile, in the black and white arena, post-war television broadcasting had grown so quickly in America that the FCC stopped issuing station licenses because it was afraid of using up the allocated bandwidth. It was now time to bring in the physicists. In May 1949, Congress asked Edward Condon, the director of the National Bureau of Standards, to investigate two things. First, the use of ultra-high frequency, or UHF, for broadcasting, and second, a standard for color TV. A standard was definitely needed because, in addition to CBS, RCA was also developing a color TV, as was a company simply called Color Television Incorporated, and they were all using different processes. Color Television Inc. was working on a fully electronic system for color signal processing, unlike CBS's mechanical color wheel model. Initially, RCA was keeping mum about their R&D, trade secrets and all, but it was widely thought that they were also working on an all-electronic process. As it turned out, RCA and Color Television were taking a similar approach, just using different methods of dividing up the color images. RCA favored individual red, blue, and green dots, and Color Television favored full lines of each color. On a lark, Manhattan Project veteran physicists Ernest Lawrence and Luis Alvarez also joined in the race to build a better color television. Be sure to check out my video on that story. Their entry was the chromatron, the name a nod to Lawrence's Nobel Prize-winning cyclotron. The physicists' work led to some interesting coincidental lobbying efforts in Washington, D.C., and many years and modifications later to Sony's famous Trinitron televisions, as described by Asianometry. CBS definitely lobbied the hardest. As part of their campaign to pique public interest, they began broadcasting an hour of color television every day, Mondays through Saturdays, for a few weeks in January and February of 1950. The programming originated in studios at WTOP and was transmitted by WOIC to a whopping 8 televisions situated in the lobby of the Walker Building in Washington, D.C. Patricia Stinnett, a model and CBS employee, promoted the novelty of color by showcasing paintings, bowls of fruit, and various countries' flags under her stage name, Patty Painter. Although a few of the eyewitnesses complained about the brightness of the picture, and I can sympathize a little bit, I remember the first time I saw high-definition color television. It was a shock to my eyes, too. But everyone in the crowd was impressed with the color. CBS's lobbying efforts eventually paid off. On October 11, 1950, the FCC formally adopted their mechanical color wheel as the national standard. RCA promptly sued, arguing for an all-electronic standard, even though they didn't really quite have a successful working prototype yet. And despite winning the standards war, CBS was still having problems with production, especially when it came to building a larger TV screen. Their screen was only 12 inches or 30 centimeters measured diagonally. By comparison, Lawrence's chromatron was an enormous 20 inches or 50 centimeters. CBS tried to purchase the rights to Lawrence's invention. Instead, Lawrence joined forces with RCA to lobby the FCC for a new all-electronic standard. And it wasn't just the television companies weighing in on the new standard. The Television Installation Service Association, a trade group based in Chicago, argued against the FCC, as did Local 1031 of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, a union with more than 21,000 members, representing workers who manufactured television equipment. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, with files including the testimony of 53 witnesses, 265 exhibits, and nearly 10,000 pages of transcripts from hearings. Nonetheless, the court ruled in favor of the FCC. On June 21, 1951, CBS made the first commercial network color television broadcast with a musical variety-style show called Premiere. The next day, they added a half-hour daytime program, The World Is Yours, which had a natural history focus and featured Patty Painter from CBS's early experimental shows. Unfortunately, almost no one saw it. The weekly magazine Variety estimated that there were only 30 color television receivers in the New York area. CBS's biggest problem was backwards compatibility. It didn't work on existing black and white televisions. Consumers could buy an adapter for $15 to $50, which is almost $200 to $650 today. The adapter would attach to their televisions and decode the color signals back into black and white. But that would provide a coarse or poorer picture. They could spend more money, specifically $60 to $150, which translates to $780 to almost $2,000 today, for a converter that would bring in the color signal directly. CBS estimated that a full-blown color receiver would cost anywhere between $200 and $500. That's $6,500 on the high end in today's money. Everyone was mad. Consumers, manufacturers, producers, probably even government officials. But there was an unexpected pause due to unfortunate events unfolding on the other side of the world. The Korean War had broken out, and the U.S. National Production Authority halted the manufacturing of any color televisions only 5 months after the new standard took effect. They didn't want products intended for the consumer market to create material scarcities and delay military priorities. But the government didn't halt R&D, so the feuding companies could take a breather. Everyone had a few more years to improve their color televisions. RCA doubled down on its sequential dot method, which just happened to also work with existing black and white TVs, and had the added benefit of using less bandwidth. Throughout this manufacturing pause, the CBS system was still not compatible with existing television sets. Television manufacturers weren't interested in adding the necessary adapters, and advertisers wouldn't pay to sponsor color television shows that no one saw. CBS's mechanical system was doomed. In 1953, CBS finally admitted that their mechanical system wasn't working. Together with RCA and Lawrence's company, Chromatic Television Laboratories, they lobbied the FCC once again to reconsider the standard. RCA submitted a 700-page petition as to why the electronic system was better. They also had invested over $40 million in it. RCA really wanted a win. On December 18, 1953, the FCC approved the RCA system as the national standard. After all that, the consumer adoption of color television was still quite slow. Color TVs were very expensive, around $13,000 or more in today's dollars, and there were very few programs to watch. It was a classic chicken and egg problem. People wanted more colored shows to justify buying a new television, but color shows were expensive to produce and broadcast. It took a decade before color really found its momentum. In 1961, NBC helped push the transition to color with its weekly Sunday programming of Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color. The following year, ABC added the color cartoons, the Flintstones, and the Jetsons. In 1966, color sets finally surpassed black and white models in sales, with 5.8 million sets sold. In 1972, color had a 50% market penetration, and by 1984, that number had risen to 90%. Still, black and white hung on. Astoundingly, in 1997, Americans still bought about 700,000 black and white TVs, And that was already a decade into the new television standard debate over HDTV, or high-definition television. I've just recounted the American story of how the United States created television standards. But it is not just an American story. It is a universal story that played out in almost every country as they transitioned from black and white to color television. A few years ago, a clip of an Iowa television station making the switch from black and white to color went viral on the internet. It was during a news report on April 14, 1967. That's 36 years after John Baird's first experimental demonstration of color TV, and almost 13 years after CBS's premiere programming. I'll leave you here with that clip so you too can witness what Dorothy must have felt when she landed in Oz. Until then, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Stay curious and keep exploring.
Just what will this change mean to the Channel 2 viewers who will still be watching us in black and white?
Well, we think you'll see a big difference on black and white receivers. The new color cameras will give an improved monochrome picture, and all our new color sets here in the studio were designed with that in mind. Are you all set, Bob? Take it away in full spectrum color.
Well, Doug, first I'd like to say this, that I feel doubly honored to have been chosen to be the first one involved in our big change, because there are so many much more colorful characters around here than this reporter.